Spring had always been a season of renewal for me, a sacred time when the earth seemed to breathe life back into itself. Every year I looked forward to the gentle thawing of winter's grip, the first burst of color in the budding trees, and the chorus of birds returning to fill the orchard with song. The orchard was my sanctuary, the place I poured my sweat, love, and hopes into. It was more than just rows of apple trees, it was a living legacy. That particular year felt different from the start. The apple trees seemed more vigorous than ever, their branches heavy with blossoms, as white and pink as fresh snow. The bees buzzed busily, and the sun shone warmly day after day, promising a bountiful harvest. I had planned for the season with meticulous care. Fertilizers applied just right, pruning done with precision. Everything was perfect. One evening, after a long day's work, I decided to take a slow walk through the orchard just after sunset. The sky was painted with a wash of purples and golds, the fading light casting long shadows between the rows. But immediately, something felt off. The air was unnervingly still, like the world had paused its breathing. The usual evening symphony, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the fluttering wings of dusk birds, was gone. It was as if every living creature had vanished. I stopped, breath visible in the sudden coolness, and took a deep breath. The scent of the apple blossoms was thick, almost suffocating, with a sickly sweet undertone that set my nerves on edge. As I made my way deeper into the orchard, I noticed it. The central tree, older and taller than the rest, its branches, once proud and sprawling, now sickly and twisted. Its leaves were blackened, curling inward like burnt paper. The bark was damp and cold to the touch, an unnatural chill that seeped into my fingertips. I reached out and ran my hand over the rough bark. It was slick, almost pulsing faintly beneath my palm. Then I heard, a soft at first, a barely audible whisper that seemed to drift on the faint evening breeze, though the air was still. I strained to listen, my heart quickening. The sound wasn't words I could make out. It was more like a voice trapped between reality and dream, a plaintive murmur, an ancient call. It felt like the tree was speaking to me, begging for help, or perhaps warning me of something terrible. I stood there, rooted in place, the twilight fading faster around me. The next morning brought no relief. When I returned to the orchard at first light, I found more trees afflicted. Leaves blackened, drooping, brittle to the touch. The decay spread rapidly, as though some invisible rot was creeping through the roots beneath the earth. The orchard workers, usually so reliable, began to refuse their shifts. Rumors circulated of strange sightings and eerie sounds after dark. Whispers among the townsfolk told of unnatural shadows moving between the trees at night, figures glimpsed out of the corner of one's eye. But I stayed. The orchard was my life. I needed to understand what was killing it. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low, I found something that chilled me to my core. Footprints. They were small, bare, and muddy, pressed deeply into the soft earth at the orchard's edge. They led away from the blackened trees and vanished into the dense woods beyond. I followed cautiously, heart pounding, the shadows stretching long and dark around me. The forest was thick with old oaks and whispering pines, the canopy blotting out the fading light. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, a scent heavy with secrets. That night, the whispers returned. Louder now, more urgent. They seemed to wrap around me in the darkness, carried on the wind through the branches like a ghostly chorus. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of a limb, every rustle of underbrush sent waves of dread crashing over me. Occasionally, out of the darkness, I caught glimpses of shadowy forms darting between trees, too quick and fleeting to clearly see. They were not quite human. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, and their eyes gleamed faintly in the moonlight, reflecting a cold, alien intelligence. As days passed and the orchard withered, those who remained whispered that something old and malevolent had awoken beneath their roots, an ancient presence that fed on life and light. By early summer, the orchard was dead. Where vibrant green had once flourished, now stood a twisted forest of blackened wood and brittle branches, silent and lifeless. The air hung heavy with the stench of rot and loss. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, even the wind seemed afraid to stir. I left then, heartbroken and haunted by the memories of the dying orchard and the things I'd seen lurking in the shadows. Sometimes, when the wind howls on cold spring nights, I swear I can hear those whispers again, faint and desperate, calling out from the darkness, warning me never to return. In the quiet little town I grew up in, the old cemetery on the outskirts was a place that everyone seemed to avoid. It wasn't just the weeds choking the cracked tombstones or the rusted iron gates hanging askew on their hinges. It was something else. An unspoken unease that clung to the air like a thick fog, especially after dark. The town's elders whispered stories, half-forgotten warnings about the graveyard being cursed or haunted. But no one could say exactly why. Most people simply crossed the street to avoid it. For years, the cemetery faded further into obscurity. Nature had claimed it back in full. The grass grew tall and wild, thorny blackberry bushes sprawled unchecked, and twisted old trees bent over the graves like dark sentinels. It was a place lost to time and memory, except for one strange and mysterious thing. Every spring, a single wildflower would bloom on one particular grave. That flower, small, delicate, and glowing faintly with an ethereal light, stood out vividly against the gray stones and the choking green vines. No one knew whose grave it was. The headstone, if there ever was one, had long crumbled away. The ground itself seemed cracked and broken, as if something underneath was struggling to push its way out. For years, I had heard rumors and seen that flower from a distance. But that spring, curiosity gnawed at me until I decided I had to see it for myself. I chose the day carefully, a warm late afternoon in April when the sky was painted with gentle pinks and soft oranges, and the scent of blooming jasmine drifted through the air. As I approached the cemetery, the familiar feeling of dread settled over me like a heavy cloak. The gate groaned loudly as I pushed it open, the rusty hinges protesting after years of neglect. The ground beneath my boots was uneven and littered with fallen branches and crumbled stones. Every step echoed in the silence, broken only by the distant call of a crow. There it was, just as I remembered. Nestled among the dead and forgotten, the wildflower bloomed defiantly. It seemed to glow faintly in the fading light, a soft inner light that pulsed gently, like the heartbeat of something alive and watching. I knelt beside it, reaching out to touch the fragile petals. The flower was warm to the touch, almost unnervingly so, like it held a secret heat beneath its delicate surface. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the cemetery, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. The hair on my arm stood on end. The shadows lengthened, and the trees seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Then I heard it, a soft cracking noise like brittle bones fracturing beneath the soil. My breath hitched, and I stumbled back a step, heart hammering in my chest. The flower's glow intensified, casting strange shadows that flickered against the surrounding gravestones. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing down on me from all sides. I felt a presence, something ancient and restless, trapped beneath the earth. And then, from deep below the flower came the voice. A low, rasping whisper that seemed to crawl into my ears and wrap around my mind. "Let me out." The words were desperate, filled with longing and pain. I felt a shiver run down my spine as the ground trembled softly beneath my feet. The flower began to wither, its petals curling inward like dying embers. Before I could react, the earth split open in front of me with a violent crack, revealing a dark, yawning pit. The darkness inside was absolute, a void that seemed to swallow all light and sound. For a moment, I was frozen in place, caught between terror and fascination. I could feel something rising up from the abyss, a cold breath on my face that smelled of decay and old sorrow. I turned and fled without looking back, my footsteps pounding through the overgrown grass and thorny bushes as if something was chasing me. When I finally reached the safety of my home, I locked every door and window. My hands trembled. Sleep eluded me that night as the haunting whisper echoed through my mind. "Let me out. Let me out." The next morning, I forced myself to return to the cemetery, this time with a group of friends and some tools. We found the grave, sealed again as if nothing had happened. The earth was smooth and undisturbed, the wildflower gone without a trace. There were no cracks, no pit, no sign of the darkness beneath, but none of us could explain the feeling of cold dread that clung to the air, or the way the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally around us. After that day, the flower never bloomed again, and the graveyard fell silent once more. But I still hear the whisper sometimes, late at night, carried on the wind through the trees. let me out. And I know that beneath that old forgotten grave something waits, patient, hungry, and bound by a promise I fear to break. Spring rains had been relentless that year, washing away the dry dust of the long winter and transforming the land around my childhood home into something vibrant and alive. The meadow, which had for years been a dull stretch of cracked earth and brittle grass, now exploded into lush greenery that stretched like a living quilt beneath the endless sky. It was a miraculous rebirth. Wildflowers in every imaginable hue bursting forth, the air thick with their sweet fragrance. Buttercups gleamed like drops of sunlight, lupins painted broad strokes of purple, and fiery red poppies swayed as if aflame in the breeze. Since I was a child, the meadow had been my refuge, a sacred place where I could wander alone and lose myself in the wildness of nature. The soft earth beneath my bare feet, the hum of bees, the occasional darting flash of a butterfly, all these sounds and sensations were like a balm to my restless mind. Here, nothing else mattered. No noise from the city, no endless responsibilities. Just the quiet rhythm of life. But that spring, beneath the vibrant beauty, something was deeply, horribly wrong. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. One afternoon, while walking through the tall grass and wildflowers, I noticed a strange absence. The usual symphony of life was missing. No birds sang in the branches, no bees buzzed lazily from bloom to bloom. No rustle in the undergrowth suggested any small creature nearby. The meadow was unnervingly silent. And then came the buzzing. At first it was faint, like the distant drone of machinery. I stopped and listened, confused. The sound grew louder, sharper, until it filled the air around me like an invisible swarm of wings beating at my ears. Drawn by curiosity and an inexplicable sense of dread, I moved toward the noise. In the center of the meadow, I found it a mass of tiny black insects, thrashing and crawling over a patch of wildflowers like a living, pulsating carpet. Their sheer number was overwhelming. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, clinging to petals, leaves, and stems in an ever-shifting wave. The buzzing was now deafening, a roar that seemed to fill the very marrow of my bones. But beneath that roar, something else surfaced. A subtle undertone that chilled me to the core. Screams. Faint, desperate, agonized screams. It was impossible, but the buzzing shifted into a chorus of cries. Thousands of tiny voices crying out in pain and terror. I staggered back, my heart hammering in my chest. The hairs on my arms rose as a cold, unnatural chill crept across my skin despite the warm spring sun overhead. The meadow, once a place of life and renewal, felt like a graveyard. Then the swarm rose. It lifted as one massive cloud, blotting out the sun and casting a shadow over the land. The buzzing turned into a monstrous roar, shaking the ground beneath my feet. The insects surged forward in a living tidal wave of black, wings thrashing and bodies writhing. Frozen with fear, I watched as the swarm surged at me, a dark, overwhelming force that brushed against my skin like icy needles. I turned and ran, every step pounding with desperation. I burst onto my porch, slamming the door behind me and locking it tight. But even inside, the terror didn't stop. That night, the buzzing returned, relentless, maddening. Scratching and fluttering against the windows, the sound of countless tiny wings beating in the darkness. Sleep abandoned me. I lay wide-eyed in the pitch-black room, listening to the swarm's infernal song, feeling their unseen presence pressing against the house. Morning brought no relief. The meadow outside was dead. The grass lay flat and gray. The flowers shriveled and blackened. Not a single insect stirred. The world was silent. The meadow had become a tomb. Days passed, the silence deepened, heavy and suffocating. I watched from my window as neighbors whispered about the dead meadow, avoiding the place like it was cursed. Children no longer played nearby. Dogs refused to enter the field. The air seemed thick with an unseen weight. Haunted by guilt and fear, I ventured back to the meadow. The air was thick with rot and decay. The soil beneath my feet was unnaturally soft, almost pulsing, as if alive with some dark presence. At the center, the patch where the swarm had gathered was crushed and trampled, like a battlefield where life had been violently extinguished. And then I saw the footprints. Tiny, muddy prints, bare and smeared with dark soil, leading away from the patch and disappearing into the shadows of the nearby woods. They were too small for any adult, too precise and delicate for any animal I knew. Drawn by a morbid curiosity, I followed the trail into the trees. The forest was dark and silent, shadows deepening with every step. The footprints led deeper into the woods until they vanished beneath a fallen log. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the stillness. Returning home, I felt eyes watching me from the forest's edge, unseen but unmistakably there. The nights grew colder. Sleep became a battleground of nightmares, swarming black clouds filling the sky, voices crying out in endless torment. I awoke drenched in sweat, heart racing, unable to escape the sound of buzzing in my mind. The days grew darker, too. Plants around the meadow began to wither. Animals disappeared. The silence wasn't just absence. It was a presence, an oppressive force that pressed down on the land and my soul. One evening, a week after the swarm first appeared, my dog vanished. No trace, just gone. I searched the woods until nightfall, hearing nothing but the faint, mocking buzz of unseen wings. The meadow remained dead, but the terror spread. Locals told stories of a curse. A spirit of the meadow, angered and hungry, feeding on life and joy. They warned me to leave, but I couldn't. Not yet. I knew deep down that something ancient and malevolent had been awakened that spring. A darkness that thrived on pain and fear, that had turned the meadow into a graveyard and threatened to consume everything I love. Sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I still hear it. Faint buzzing like 1,000 tiny voices calling out from the darkness, begging for release. Or perhaps calling me to join their endless swarm. As the last echoes of these terrifying tales fade into the night, we're left staring into the darkness, our minds racing with unsettling questions. The dying orchard, where something ancient and malevolent whispered through blackened branches. The cursed grave that pulsed with unnatural life beneath our trembling fingers. The meadow that transformed from paradise to purgatory in the span of a single, horrifying moment. These aren't just stories. They're warnings. Warnings that spring's renewal comes with a price, that the thawing earth sometimes releases what should have remained buried forever. But here's the truly chilling thought. These accounts came from ordinary people like you, people who never expected to brush against the supernatural until it reached out and grabbed them. That's what makes these stories so terrifying. They could happen to anyone. They could be happening right now, just beyond your window, in the woods behind your home, or even in the forgotten corners of your own town. We've all felt it, that inexplicable chill when walking past a certain house, the primal urge to run when night falls in an empty field, the way shadows sometimes move just wrong when you're alone. These aren't mere coincidences. They're glimpses of something older and far more dangerous than we dare to admit. Which brings me to you, dear listener. What secrets are you keeping? What strange encounters have you buried deep, afraid others wouldn't believe you? That shadow that moved without a source. The voice that whispered your name when no one was there. The dream that felt too real to be just a dream. These moments matter. They're pieces of a puzzle we're desperately trying to solve. Your story could be the missing link that helps someone else understand their own terrifying experience. Your encounter might hold the key to unraveling mysteries that have haunted our world for centuries. That's why we're begging you, share your truth with us. No detail is too small, no experience too unbelievable. In the realm of the unexplained, it's often the smallest clues that lead to the most shocking revelations. As you go about your day, remember this: the world is far stranger than we've been taught. The more we uncover, the more we realize how little we truly understand. Ancient forces don't care about our skepticism. They exist, whether we believe in them or not, and they're always watching, waiting, hungry. If these stories have unsettled you, and how could they not, do us one favor: like, share, and subscribe. Not for us, but for those who need to hear these warnings, for the people who are right now experiencing something they can't explain. Your click might lead them to the answers they desperately need. And to those who think they're safe, who believe the supernatural keeps its distance, just wait. The night is long and something is always listening. Your story may be next. Until then, try to sleep, if you can.